Okay, good morning. Hemshech, Ayin, Beis. We're in the second paragraph on volume 3, Ayin, Beis, volume 3, page 1266. We're in the second paragraph. So after establishing what Mutveh is, the natural wiring, so to speak, of the emotional characteristics of the divine soul, like he began the last page, he's talking now about the divine soul within the human being, that it also has the 3 stages. So what is Mutveh? Briefly, 2 things. One is the natural emotional inclinations that's just wired into the divine soul and the shamas that come from Chesed, the different branches of the candelabra of the menorah, from Gvura and so on. In practice, that translates into behavioral. The main thing is that the person behaves accordingly, even if there's no revealed emotion, or that there may also be some emotional element as well. The second point he made in Mutveh is timimus shebelev, that sincerity, that commitment, that loyalty, that total connection, which is just a state of being. The divine soul is just connected to its source. Even if there's no expression, emotional expression, and there is no emotional expression, there's no excitement, it's not due to anything that stimulated the soul, it's just the natural nature of the soul. I mean, earlier he used the example like the love of a child to a father on page 1222. And I was yesterday suggesting that it could be that it's part of that as well. So the love is just there. Sometimes you need something to stimulate it, but it's there. It's wired into the child, has a natural love to a father. So here he's not calling it love, he's calling it tmimus shebelev. What he called the exact words were tmimus shebelev, right? And this is not subject to change, just as the emotional nature of the divine soul is not subject to change. So it's not subject to change, so because it's just there in its place, and the worldly matters, therefore, are not as significant to this part of the soul, to this dimension, rather, and therefore the worldly matters and worldly distractions don't weaken it, and don't strengthen, and nothing, and no avodah strengthens it. It's not subject to work and effort. And then he said at the end of the last paragraph that we learned that this is the foundation, the established foundation for all other avodah, just like the rooting when you seed the ground, or the pregnancy of a child, of the fetus, as it's established properly, the natural rootedness is done properly, then it will grow also in a proper and healthy way. Now, in the next paragraph that we began, I'll just go over it again. I'll start from the new paragraph. She says, "V'hine b'chinas mutveh is b'chinas helam." You said that as well earlier. It's concealed. It's like the seeds inside the ground. You don't see it, but it's embedded within the spirit and within the soul, the divine soul. She'ein kan av v'yiras bizgalus. There is no revealed love and awe. Gam b'chinas tmimus shebelev ein b'zeh izgalus av v'yira. Also in the tmimus shebelev, which is a total the commitment and innocence and loyal, sincerity, integrity. There's no revealed av v'yira. V'zehu, and this state, which is the first stage of the nefesh halikis, before it develops further, which we're going to learn after the parentheses more. He says, this is b'nefesh halikis kashu b'chinas katnus b'chinas helam. This is the nefesh halikis as it is in its early stage. We called it in its diminished stage, or it's not undeveloped stage, was maybe the best word to use. Nefesh halikis is not yet fully developed within the child. We're not talking about the nefesh halikis on its own. We're talking about as it's now been instilled inside the newborn. So it's in its earliest stages. It's not yet developed, so it's in a state of katnus b'chinas helam. And it expresses itself either, like we said before, with just ma'aseh b'poel, behavioral sur merav aseh tev, with maybe a little emotion, or tmimus shebelev, or in addition another tmimus shebelev. This sincerity, this integrity, this innocence. Now, the parentheses, which we'll learn now, he's going to explain that this is not just due to the fact that the divine soul is in Golus or in a concealed state due to whatever concealed state. It could be because of the divine presence is concealed. This is the natural process of how a nefesh halikis develops. This is how it has to be in the divine soul when there are no halamas vestadim. There are no halamas vestadim. It's not like the nefesh halikis is trapped, let's say, by an adult, a person who's fully controlled by his animal soul and is doing every type of following his own impulses and emotional pleasures, material pleasures and carnal pleasures, or wherever it may be. So the soul then, nebach, as we say, is in golus. It's in golus because the human being is now controlled by his animal soul. He's not talking about that. He's saying the neshama, even Moshe Elikim Oses Adam Yosher. The way the human being was created, the expression in the pasuk is the way God created a person in a straight path before there's been any wavering. We're not talking due to sins or due to any distractions. It's the way it's been wired. This is the way the Eibishter created a person, that the nefesh halikis develops in stages. Like I mentioned, language of halacha, that by the bris is ascholas knisses nefesh halikis. By the bris, the beginning of the nefesh halikis beginning to enter into the child, and by the bar mitzvah is gmar knisses nefesh halikis, the conclusion of it, and then it begins to develop further. So you see, it's in stages, even like you said. This is an expression used very often when you want to talk about how a person was created, and then what happens if they waver and they then need to correct or repair or do tshuva. So as Alakim Osam as Yadim Yasher usually goes like on, sometimes refers to tzaddik, and a Baal Tshuva went off that path and then returned to it in a different fashion. So bottom line is, this is the natural process. So tzarich is tchila b'chinas hakatnus. So the way God created the human being, the nefesh halikis enters in stages. And here we're talking, first it has to be in a state of katnus, which is in a more diminished state. It's just beginning to grow. Just like we see a great Rebbe, even a Rebbe himself, a tzaddik gomer, doesn't just grow into an adult and he's a Talmid Chacham and a Gon. He develops. He's also subject to the process of growth. That he's first a cotton, and then he grows and grows further and grows as faculties develop. His midas, his chach, his chabad, his chagas, everything about him develops, both physically and spiritually in every possible way. The only thing is, he has a special neshama. The neshama that was given is a neshama. The Alter Rebbe had a new neshama chadasha. And those that look closely, like we said before, butzin, could maybe recognize it even to some extent. Like the Baal Shem Tov knew that a new neshama is coming into this world, and suggested all the preparations, etc. But if you were sitting there in the room and the Alter Rebbe was born, and you saw him in his early stages, you may see an extraordinary child, but he's still a child. You wouldn't compare him to the Alter Rebbe as he was a full adult. I'm saying even a person where everything is in the holiest and purest way, because that's the way the Eibishter made it. Only Adam and Chava were created at age 20. Everyone else goes through growth, and everything is a process of growth. Of course, everything is relative to that person. You can't compare a neshama like the Alter Rebbe's growth to a regular person's growth, but it's still a process of growth. And the first stage is called katnus, or what we called before ibur, or mutveh. This is all this stage. It's all the mutveh hainu rak. So tzarich is tchila b'chinas hakatnus, the mutveh. First has to be, the first stage is the diminished state, or what's called the undeveloped state of mutveh, which is the natural wiring of this person. And how does that express itself? Hainu, like we learned before. Hainu rak b'asiyah b'pel mamish. B'sur mara v'asei teiv. That it expresses itself only in behavioral matters. B'asiyah, action, in actual action. B'sur mara, in avoiding that which is negative. Asei teiv, that which is positive. Doing that which is good. B'tekev v'chezik, with an intensity and in a strength, like we learned before. He said clearly it's with strength, but it's all part of the natural. It's not due to avodah. It's the natural. It's used before the word on the previous page. Just want to see the exact expression. He said those words. He says, "B'tekev v'chezik." I remember. Just want to see the exact words. 1 second. I don't find it right now, but I remember in the middle of the page somewhere he said it. Oh, the pale v'tekev gadol, shelo yasser afilu ziz kol shehu. Yeah. So in action and behavior, everything is in its purest form, is completely committed in the takev, and like he says now, the second thing, b'liyas tomim b'libay, and being complete or being sincere or being completely committed with his heart. In his beliboy, in his heart, not with emotions, but it's the natural loyalty, the natural connection that we learned about. So here you see, he brings it all together, all in Mutveh. So in the context of, let's say, a person like a tzaddik, take a Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu, we see even as a child, he already grabbed the crown of Parei. So you saw that already. He had a sense of what a king is, but it's still Moshe Rabbeinu, still a child. That's why later he put the coal to his mouth. So the point being is that it's that the natural inclination of this child has this perfect state, but it's all in the state of katnus. It's in a state like a childish state. Okay. Like simple faith, which already he compared to at the bottom of page 1225. If you remember, he said Tmimus Shebelev is Pnimi, Amuna Pshuta is Makif, but he compared it because they both indicate on something that you just have without any effort and without any work and Aveda. It's Amuna Pshuta, it's the simple faith of every person, like he says now. You see, and he uses Noshim and Tenekis, even though it sounds a little dismissive or condescending. Obviously it's not, because he's talking here Noshim in the context of people who may not be educated. So even someone who doesn't have any education, who's not worked on any Aveda, has a Munah Pshuta more than mature adults who have Das. Now, why is he emphasizing that it's even more? Because it just makes the case even stronger. That which Mutveh brings, like he said before, that foundation, in many ways is purer and more refined or higher level of amunah than someone who has das. Someone who already has intelligence. Intelligence can sometimes also block amunah. So Chassidus explains the example given that when you put your foot, when you go your body into a hot bath, to hot water, you put your heel first. You don't put your head in to test the heat, to test how hot it is, and also because the heel is less sensitive, so it won't burn as quickly as a more sensitive part of the body. So Chassidus used that as an example from Mesiras Nefesh of Ikvus de Meshicha, that in the later generations, precisely because we don't have the higher faculties as active and as powerful as it was in earlier generations, but that's what we put. That's like this: the Anoshim Pshutim, the simple people, the foot soldiers. They go on the front line. That's the Mesiras Nefesh. They're ready to jump in immediately, even into hot water, into challenging situation. Precisely because when you have seichel calculates and makes and measures and determines, and seichel can also conceal. It says Amunah Pshuta. Of course, you can work on the seichel being aligned with amunah. It's not a fundamental contradiction, but on its own, a person like a child will just follow orders much easier than an adult that's a whole sophisticated, intelligent person. The mashal of the Baal Shem Tov on Tfilah La'ani, the illiterate person goes straight into the king's inner sanctum. The educated person gets caught up with all the distractions. So Giluyim have a critical value, as we're learning and we're going to learn, because you want it all revealed and in a pneumius. But if you ask purely, the pure firepower of Amunah is far more by one that doesn't have any giluyim that block the way. That's why it says the Baal Shem Tov has a powerful Torah. Pesi yam l'chol davar. It says, Pesi is a person who's like a fool. He believes in everything. He's like gullible or naive. So it says in the Medrash, Pesi yam l'chol davar zeh Moshe Rabbeinu. So of course the obvious question, I could say Moshe is Pesi yam l'chol davar, naive like a Pesi, like a fool that just believes everything that he's told. So Baal Shem Tov says, he tells us a whole story connected to it. That sometimes by all your gainus, your scholarship and everything can block the way of that simple connection to God, to the essence of God. The Ish Pasha, the Pshittus of Ish Pasha touches the Pshittus of Atzmos, because it's not distracted by and not in any way distracted by all the revelations around it. And the child that killed Mamadaka, that simple, subtle, silent voice, is where you find the deepest dimensions. So in the story, it's a longer story, I won't go into it right now, but the story says that be a fool and just believe in God. So it's not a fool as in someone who is an idiot and doesn't know anything. It's after you have all the intelligence, you suspend that, you put it aside to stand before God naked like a child, innocence of a child. So it's the innocence that's beyond intelligence, not the innocence preceding intelligence. It's like when someone says, I don't know, when a child says, I don't know, and when a big scholar says, I don't know, it's a very different I don't know. One precedes knowledge and one follows knowledge. So a child has it in the simple, pure form, the Amunah Pshuta. And anyway, where there's no Giluyim, it's like when we talk about Simchas Torah, that everybody dances together with a wrapped Sefer Torah. When the Torah is open, there's a distinction between those that can learn better and those that learn less, between scholars and lesser scholars. When you Simchas Torah, you're touching the etzem, we all dance with the feet that lift up the Torah and the head as well. That's the pshitus. So he's comparing now and saying that in Mutveh, it expresses itself in a way that is because the Gdelim have das already. So he's adding another point now. Not only is Mutveh the level of Tmimus Lev, but it's actually stronger and more intense when in the Zman HaKatnus, in the early stages of development, in the first stages of development of any human being. Ube'emes, and now he goes back to what he said in the last paragraph. Ube'emes hi ha'ashrasha. In truth, it's even more than that. It's not just that it's stronger. It's actually the hashrasha, is the rootedness. It's when everything begins, is that when you plant the seeds. The Yesod Musad, like he said before, that established foundation. Al Aveda Amitis, on true Aveda. So all the Aveda will come later as the person grows and matures and develops in their levels of serving God. It is all based on that foundation canal, like we said earlier, just a few lines earlier. And this tmimus remains forever, like a foundation, it always remains there forever. So though it's more powerful or so-called more apparent in the early stages, because later you're going to see more of the giluyim, more of the revelatory faculties of the individual. It always remains, however, and as a foundation, Nisheres Leilam always remains there forever. He said that earlier as well. It doesn't change. That's like the natural tmimus, the natural innocence of the nefesh alekis, the natural innocence. You know, when people would see, the Rebbe would always walk around with a siddur wherever he went. I can't say wherever he went. It's not when he walked outside home or something like that, but when he came out to any event, it was always with a siddur. Every davening with a siddur. And there were those that thought, when they didn't know the Rebbe, they thought that, they thought the simpler people walk with a siddur. Now, people who know davening and they know things by heart, they don't have to work with Hasidah all the time. But I remember when I wrote Toward a Meaning for Life, I think it's on the chapter of faith. I was very touched by that feature of the Rebbe. And then I heard the story that the Rebbe, when he was a very young child, 5 or younger even. So one night, his mother came, the Rebbe Tzachana, and she didn't find the Rebbe in his crib or in his bed. They all got worried, where'd the Rebbe go? And they looked around the house, and they finally found the Rebbe standing in the shul that was in the house. His father was a Rav, so there was a shul in the house in Yekaterinoslav. And the Rebbe was standing with the siddur and shaking. Now, technically, he didn't read yet. I think he was even younger than 5. But that's what he was doing. So I thought to myself, he also saw the Rebbe when he was with children, by like Bema parades or Tzivus Hashem rallies, or in general, you just saw the demeanor and the face and everything changed when it came to children. So the Rebbe once said, I think someone asked the Rebbe why he spends so much time during the parades and rallies. The Rebbe's a Rebbe. It seems like he would be more time spent with scholars and learning and teaching and saying Mamorim and Chasichus and so on. So the Rebbe said that when you're with children, you're one step closer to the emes, to truth. So the point being is, of course, the goal is not to remain a child that doesn't have full knowledge of Torah and full developed Ava V'yira, but that innocence and emes of a child is far clearer, is far more in a child. Child is a seamlessness, does not have duplicity. When do children learn to lie? They learn to lie from their parents and from adults around them. Children have a natural honesty about them, and they learn the corrupt ways of this world from the world. So the closer you are to the child state, the purer it is, which is one of the reasons we're so drawn to that innocence of it, like a freshly fallen snow. And then, obviously, we live in this world, and the Neshama came down to enter into a world that is not so pure, and to make it pure. And one of the key things is to remember never to lose the innocence of the child. That even as we grow into sophisticated adults and we engage and we're less, and we're not, and we get more jaded and not as sincere and innocent as we were as children, but to always hold on to that. So to me, it always felt that the Rebbe, in his own way, was always focusing on that. In subtle ways, it wasn't always blatant, but it was in many of his talks and sikhs, you always saw that type of message, that you really wanted to have the purity of the child, obviously with the sophistication of an adult. You have the best of both worlds. But a child, the hevel she'ein bei chet, is the breath that does not have a sin. And the focus on chinuch, especially in time of crisis and gzeres and decrees, bringing together the children. Mordechai brought the children. The power of children. The children are the arevim, the guarantors of Torah. Look at Pesach, the focus on children. Purim, Shavuos, even bringing newborns to shul for Aser Sadibris. These are not just nice educational tips. These are actually all about really bringing out that purest part of who we are, all of us are, and connecting. V'heshiv levavos al bonim, the Rebbe would very often cite from Malachi. V'heshiv levavos al bonim al yedei bonim. May the hearts of the parents return through their children. And on and on and on. I'm just focusing on this point. This is all a state of Mutveh. But the goal is not to remain there. The goal is to go and to develop and become a Adam Eitz Asada, blossom into a tree with Meichin and Midas, which we're going to learn about. Midas and Meichin, I should say, in that order, and still maintain the Mutveh that is always embedded and always remains the foundation. Never lose connection to that purest state of that Tomim Belibe, as he says here, that remains forever as the foundation of this established foundation of everything that we end up doing. So you always have that, still that innocence, even when we have our sophisticated tools and our sophisticated expressions and so on. Now you could say, what's wrong with just staying in that place? Because that's atzmi, and you want to be giluim. The Eibishter wants a dira b'tachtenim. He doesn't want a dira. He doesn't just want a connection to that pure place. He wants that purity should permeate and impact and change, transform even the Giluyim, the revealed states of all the levels of the Atzilas, Bri, Yitzir, Asiyah, and not just Nihi, but Chagas and Chabad, and as high as you can, and a combination of that, you have both together. So this is the first stage called Mutveh. So let me just stop here at the end of the parentheses if anybody has any question, because now he's going to go to talk about how then it grows from there, how it develops further. Similar to what we learned before about all the development of the stages from Mutveh to Murgash to Muskel. Anybody want to ask anything? Any questions, Clary?
It's a known thing that a big scientist met the Rebbe and he was very impressed with the Rebbe. And then at the end, the Rebbe asked him about something about Emunah, if he believes that, I don't know, Mashiach or what. And he couldn't believe it. The Rebbe is such a scientist, so he had such a respect. And here suddenly the Rebbe is talking with such like a child. How is this going? But now this gives the explanation.
Yeah. The expression in the Baal Shem Tov story is, ich bin a Kind, ich bin a Nar und ich glaub. That's the expression. I'm a fool and I believe. Of course, it's not advocating being a fool. It means with all my wisdom and all my intelligence, I put that aside and I believe like a fool, meaning like someone that is beyond even intelligence. Yeah.
I also heard about the Baal Shem Tov that Kol Yomov, he wanted to serve Hashem in a way of mimus, because with Seichel and Das, he had it, but he wanted to have it with mimus, not Seichel, and that's what he's saying here.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, so let's continue on, unless somebody else wants to say something. Okay. So after the parentheses, on page 1226, can be found at ayinbeis.com if you want to follow the text. So he says like this: now following Mutveh, this natural state, the foundational state that we're discussing here, Hubchinas Murgash, V'hu Agdol K'tzas. Now we move to Murgash. You may recall back on the top of page 1225, he also went from, or actually, hold on. Well, no, the bottom of page 1224, but there he was speaking about it in the sense, the biological sense of it, the natural growth of every child. Here he's talking about it from the divine soul's perspective. It's still the same three stages, but of course it's talking about the divine, the neshama elikis. If you look back on pages 1124, 1123, actually 1122, till 1125, there he was talking about it more in a biological context. So on the bottom of page 1224, just if you want comparisons, you could see how he moves from Mutveh to Murgash. So now he says the same here. He says, then you come to the level of Murgash. Mutveh, again, is wired the way we're wired, the very natural state, Mutveh. He also used Mutveh from the word concealment, like Tovu b'yamsuf. It's concealed, it's submerged. Murgash, as the word means it's felt. You're feeling something now. There's a feeling. That's somewhat a measure of growth. So we're growing now in the midas of the nefesh alikis from Mutveh to Murgash. But he calls it ktsas, hagdol ktsas. Not full blown, it's not fully matured and fully grown, but it's the beginning of growth. And remember, growth is the key operative word from the beginning of this discussion, because remember talking about Gan Eden and Odam Eitz Asad, the Zah, and Midas. So we're discussing the growth of Midas, how it obviously in a person's individual life. So he says, Hagdol Ktsas. V'hainu, what does that mean? V'hainu, and this means Shamidas Hamudvoyim Boyim Beis Galus. That the Midas that are embedded in him naturally, that are inherent, intrinsic in the nature of the person, are coming to be seen. They're coming and becoming revealed. Like again, he said this earlier as well. It's not a new growth. It's the same seed that you planted is now beginning to sprout. So you begin to see a sapling, you begin to see some growth. Or if you take the example of the pregnancy, at the first moment, it's a conception. Of conception, there's one cell, one fertilized egg, fertilized by the seed, but it's one cell. As it splits, and begins to develop, something begins to sprout. Now it's still quite minuscule at that stage, but the point is there's his galus ksas. How much? That's already dependent. What stage in the Murgash itself? But we're talking in the early stage. The first thing begins to you start seeing some recognizable features, some feeling, some sense, some recognition. Yeah, he said that also. I'm just comparing it because I just think it'll help understand the whole idea. So what he says like this. Just one second. I want to just see Murgash, what he says. Yeah, on page, I'm just reading page 1223. He says, Shaboyim begilik tzas. He used the same expression. Va'agam shemalubish b'chinas katnus, the maisinitis of yechem lakiri b'mhus tivei, the butzin. I'm reading from the end of the paragraph on page 1223. V'nikdolim amidus ma'at b'meshch hashem the ben gimel v'dalad. He does say the age 3 and 4 there. That's Murgash. He says, "Etzem hamidus ein kol chodesh be'etzem teiram hainu b'atfos hamidus shelo yishuna b'tivei mehepech lehepech." It's only that the same seed of Mutveh is now developing and sprouting and becoming something is being revealed. Okay, u'kamoishin is barely ill, like we learned earlier. Actually, last page, previous page. One person is not similar to another in the nature of their emotions. He said that in the top early on here. I want to see where he said that. Right here. The Teichen Libes ein lev echad dem lechavere. Good. He said it also on page 1222. I'm just doing the comparisons because it helps understand the picture. So I'm just repeating that again. Okay. So basically different personality, different features. So one is not similar to another. Okay, that's the end of the sentence. So what does that mean? So therefore, as they become apparent, they're different. You're starting to see those differences in this early stage of Murgash where it's becoming revealed. Omnom. So even though they're different one another, however, so it's true that one is not similar to another person, but when it comes to that same individual, whatever is embedded, those same emotional features that are mudvoim, that are naturally ingrained, and in that person, in that nefesh, that itself comes in a revealed state, and in a way that Murgash felt. You can sense it. Which means that the person himself feels something now. Like we see, there's a stage where a child is not yet feeling, so to speak, that type of consciousness. And then there's a state where there's something's being felt. So in the context of the neshama lekis, the divine soul, that we have now some measure of gilui, of revelation, of love, or awe, or fear, as he put it earlier, in the heart. Even though it's in a very diminished state, it's still in a diminished state. It's still in a very undeveloped state of katnus. Ukamaymer kenar Yisrael. So the pasuk says kenar Yisrael v'yavehu, because the Israel is like a nar, like a child. V'yavehu, like a child that you love. So you say the expression nar. Nar is not the expression you use on a gadol. You use that expression on a child. V'hainu, what is that in Aveda? Because the love and awe here is not due to a developed emotional experience, but it's all still due to the very natural ingrained nature of that soul. Not due to some intellectual recognition or intellectual appreciation. That's the level of a nar, that you don't yet have seichel, it's still nar. So he's explained the Kenar Yisrael, when you call Yisrael a nar, you're talking about them still in that state of katnus. I just want to say something because to make it clear, because there can be a misunderstanding here. We learned this actually in volume 2, you may recall, before the whole piece on Yesh, Ayin, and Yesh, he spoke about when the Jews left Egypt. He talks there about Lechem in Hashemayim, Lechem in Haaretz, that the man did not fall right after they left Egypt. It took a little while. I think the man began in the month of Iyar, 23rd of Iyar, I forgot the date. But in Beshalach, when it says the man began to fall, it wasn't right after they left Mitzrayim. They left Mitzrayim the 15th of Nisan. They were still eating lechem in haaretz. That's actually the matzahs that they ate. And then they continued eating lechem in haaretz, earth, food of bread of the earth. So he explained there, why is that the case? So he said, because when they left Mitzrayim, they were still in a state of katnus. In a state of katnus, they were not yet ready to eat lechem in hashamayim, which is a higher level of awareness. Das elyon, like we learned. It's a higher awareness. It's bread from heaven. So they still were capable of eating lechem in haaretz, only capable of lechem in haaretz, because they use the word katnus. So you see from that, katnus is critical to point out. Katnus, many people would define as immature or childish even. In Kabbalah, when they use katnus hamechen or moichen de katnus, doesn't mean childish or immature in the regular way we use it, like the person's being immature. It means it's not yet developed. So yes, technically it's immature, and technically it is childish. But I just wanted to make sure that it's much more subtle than that you understand that we're dealing with something that's a level that's called katnus, and then there's a level you reach to godless. So technically speaking, biologically speaking, is the difference between a child and an adult. But Vedic, spiritually speaking, is the difference between a very basic level of experiencing godliness and a far more sophisticated level of experiencing godliness. Just like with a child, you also see that we know that at sheyitim tam dogon, a child doesn't recognize his father until he tastes the taste of grain. He brings that there too, because it begins the recognition. Before that, a child can't eat solids. So even in lechem in haaretz, you first begin with drinking liquids or very soft foods. Then you get to be able to take something that's more solid, and then higher levels and higher levels. It's just, again, examples of how in the early stages, things are far more in a less developed state, then they become more developed. In our own Aveda, this is also true. And generally, every day, when we wake up in the morning, it says, Neshama ba'apoy. Your soul is still in your nostrils. In other words, you have not yet, your soul is not fully active in the beginning. That's why we wash negelvasa to get rid of the toxins or the impurities that accumulated during the night. And also in Aveda, you don't begin by Shema, you don't begin the morning with Shema Yisrael or Shemon Esrei. You begin with Moedani, and then Birchas HaShachar. Then yes, there is a Shema in the Birchas HaShachar, but then you develop, because the neshama needs time, like anything. It's like first you need a warm-up before you get to the higher levels of Aveda. So in language of Chassidus and Kabbalah, the morning is more a state of katnus within the human being, even as an adult. And that katnus slowly develops as we flex our muscles, so to speak, our spiritual muscles, and we grow. Just wanted to put it into context. We understand what we're talking about. And in general in life, you can say there are times we're in a more state of katnus where we're somewhat more diminished and less expansive. And there are times we feel very expansive, more a state of godless. And each person relative to their own levels. So he's saying, so Kinar Yisrael is actually referring to the Jews as they left Egypt. It's talking about nar, they're in a state of nar, which means they have avayir, they have like a child has love to its parent, but it's not due to a sophisticated or a elaborate contemplation, like he says, akaras haseichel, but it's a state of nar. So now we've moved from the level of Mutveh to Murgash, from Ibur to Yunika. So now he's going to compare and spoke about Yunika in this context, in this second stage. But before I read on, anybody has any question about what I just explained or just said? If not, I'll just, because he's still in the middle of the topic of the nar, and he's going to explain that it's connected to Yunika, which is already the nursing, where the child begins to develop and grow, not just Ibur, the state of pregnancy. It's interesting, actually, Mitzrayim itself, Yetzias Mitzrayim is compared to Ibur and Leda. Pregnancy is when the Jews were still in Egypt. Then Goy Mekerev Goy, it says they came out from and they came and emerged, and it's called Leda Sam Yisrael. Yetzias Mitzrayim is compared sometimes to a birthing. So it's interesting as well in this context, from a pregnant stage to a birthing stage. Yeah. Okay.
Mature and maturing.
Yeah. This is emotional maturation, maturing of the emotions of. Now he's talking about the divine soul as it develops. Yeah. Maturing is a good word. Just gotta keep in mind, we're not talking about the maturing purely on a physical level. We're talking about maturing in a spiritual and a divine service level as well. Okay. So now he says, so Me'er Eir, we mentioned a number of times, it's cited very often in Chassidus. The authors are Meir Papirish. He was a student from the students of the Arizal, and he wrote a sefer called Me'er Eir, is like an encyclopedia, actually a Kabbalistic encyclopedia. It goes from Aleph to Tov, all the Hebrew the order of the Hebrew alphabet, and very short, sometimes 3 to 5, sometimes most 7, 10 lines. He brings the Kabbalistic level of every level. Like it starts with, let's say, Oir, or Bria, or you name it. Any word you have, Sheleg, Garin, Ish, Isha. So he has it all in that order and brings the Kabbalistic level of that word, that entity. There's a Yair Nesiv there that there's a commentary that actually brings the sources in Zohar and other places. But it became a very fundamental go-to sefer that Chassidus brings often as a source, the sources of establishing certain levels. So he says like this, in Me'er Eir Ois Nun, like I just said letters, so Nar would be in Ois Nun. Sif Chav Gimel, or Simach Chav Gimel. So in other words, Ois Nun 23 is the word nar. So if you look at Me'er Eir, you'll see nar. And what does he say there? He says nar, vov ksav is dianika. So nar, child, is the 6 edges or the 6 sides of yanika. So that's a very brief and almost cryptic statement for most of us. But let's unpack it. Remember, yanika is the second level of development. There's midas of ibur, then yanika, the equivalent of mutveh and murgash, nihi and chagas. So in ibur and in the first stage, ibur and mutveh, we said it's concealed. It's like a seed that's been seeded in the ground. The child has everything that will later emerge, but it's still in the state of a concealed state. Nothing has sprouted yet. You don't yet see any emotional personality. In the early state, in Yonika, as we learned earlier, when the child nurses, so the food and especially the pleasure begins to develop the child begins to grow physically and physiologically and also emotionally. And you can start seeing a child's reactions to things. So that's what he says, that nar is the vav ksavis, which is essentially zah. Vav ksavis is the 6 emotions of Yanika. Why is it called vav ksavis? Because one of the ways we talk about structure, we talk about vav ksavis is the 6 directions, like when we do the nanuyim, the movements of the lulav and the dal minim on sukkis. We go 6 different directions. So there's, of course, north and south, east and west, and up and down, or in and out. You could say it's Eirech, Rechev, Ve'emek is 3 times 3 is 6. Yeah, and then the 3 is the third dimension. So the point being is that the six ktsavis reflect our manifestation of the 6 emotions, the 6 basically angles, or the 6 edges, the directions, and the 6 parameters, the parameters of Unika. So it's essentially saying in simple English, Vav ktsavis Unika is the 6 emotions in a state of Unika, in contrast to Ibur or contrast to Meichin. So they're beginning to emerge. That's why it's called Nar. So it's like the state of a child's emotions, if you wish. Because at that state, there's already a revelation. The midas are being revealed, the feelings are being revealed. You can see emotions. There he says clearly, Murgash. The level of the midas that's already being felt in contrast to the Mutveh that's not felt or sensed. The Hainu is galus ha'ava v'yira tivis. Tivis. That the natural ava v'yira of love and awe is being revealed. But the natural. Okay. Now he's picturing, remember we learned earlier that as soon as midas start beginning to emerge, you have to say there's also some seichel, some recognition. We spoke about this at length when we discussed this at length, when we talked about, I'm just looking where it was. I believe it was on page 1223. Yeah. That the seichel, even though the seichel is not full-blown a mature intelligence, but there's something there that the child recognizes, for example. It recognizes the bottle. It recognizes the food. It recognizes its mother, its father. So there's recognition, intelligent recognition, that goes hand in hand with the development of these midas. So that's what he's going to address now. And now we learned earlier, it was explained earlier, and this goes back, I said, page 1223, I believe, is where he really discussed it. Yeah. So even though it's primarily still natural, yeah. So he says like this. So we learned, it's discussed earlier, the Ava V'yira Tivim, that even the natural love and awe of midas, of feelings, Yesh Behem Ezis Bonanus, they have some contemplation. That's like when a person says, "You're my father." So I recognize and I think about you being my father. So therefore, there's a certain attraction. I want to be connected with you. I want to avoid things that you dislike. So just like the recognition of the father, same thing is we say to love God, Elokecha, because He's your source of life. He's your life source. He's your sustenance. So you have some element of recognition. It's not just Ava V'yira that's just naturally sprouting. There's also connected that the seichel is there, but as he's going to explain momentarily, that's not full seichel. That's a seichel just enough. Remember we said it was just ma'at. All you need is a little because the love is there already. The child already has love to his father. Except you need to be aware of it. You can also not be aware. When you're aware, it doesn't take much. But who? So he explains now in Aveda what that means. She is burning, so he contemplates. Page 1227, the next page. He contemplates how Erein Sof, the divine infinite light, is Chaya Chaim, is the life of all life, which means the source of all life. Chaya Elam B'chlal, V'chaya Nafshe B'frat, the life, the sustenance of the world in general, and of his nefesh specifically. So when a person contemplates on that, he is beinin, and he contemplates b'yeked inyan achayis aliki, in the preciousness, in the value of this divine energy, this divine sustenance, this divine life force. The mipsari echza, from his flesh he grasps and appreciates b'yeked chayis nafshe, in the value of the chayis, the life force that gives him his life sustenance, his soul. Shekola geluim hu mechayes hanefesh. So v'yizbein b'yekelin achayes aliki. The mipsori echza. Let me read it again a moment. I think we have to read a little different tone. V'yizbein b'yekelin achayes aliki. He contemplates on the value and the yeker, the preciousness of the divine energy. The mipsori echza. And he grasps that through his own flesh. Mipsori echza.
Yeah.
And from his flesh, he grasps it. Why? Because when you look at your own flesh, you see biyeker chayes nafshe, in the value of the chayes, of the importance, the sustenance of the soul. Why? Shekola giluyim hu machayes hanefesh. All the life force, the revealed life force within the human being, is from his nefesh, not from his guf. The guf b'lei chayes ene klum. And what's a body without the life force of the soul? The adarabba, hu dover nimas. The body on its own is a dover nimas. It's a despicable thing. It's just a corpse. Just a material corpse. That's all it is. A lifeless entity. And it's all its quality is coming because of the chayes of the nefesh that's in it. And that's why a person loves his life. People, we're not talking here about ego trip. We're talking about they love to be, they love and they hold on to their lives. They hold their lives precious. And very much desires that this chayes, which means your life force, should be revealed. So this is even physical life, which is your own physical life. And how much more so the divine energy that sustains, which is true life. Because that's the chayachayim. That gives life to the soul and to the real true life of everything. Now, so all this contemplation, so all this creates an awakening, a stimulation, arousing of ava. So through this becomes a Chassidus. He gets awakened ba'ava with a love toward an attraction and a connection, wanting to connect with the v'chayes aliki, with the divine energy and vitality. So 1 second. So you say, hold on. This sounds to me like a very big contemplation. This is not just childish emotions. This isn't just immature or underdeveloped emotions. So he's going to answer that right now and explain. But remember, we're talking avodah now. We're not talking about an actual child necessarily, because a child obviously cannot contemplate necessarily in all of this. We're talking about the state where we've moved from pure natural instinct, reflexive, you can say, from the reflexive, impulsive hatva of Mutveh, whether it's in behavioral surmaran asetev action, or tomim beliboy, that in embedded loyalty and commitment and innocence, we've moved now to some form of revelation. So he's going to qualify. The kol zeh, ima yes, and all this, ima yes zeh asogav is bonus. Even though all this is a comprehension and a contemplation, it's only to awaken that which is naturally there. Like we spoke about, the child naturally loves his father, but he may not be aware. So this is all about awakening that natural connection. Because his nature is to love to love this energy. And when he contemplates how this is his sustenance, his life force, how do you misay it ba'ava? So in other words, every human being naturally loves to be alive and loves life, in that sense of the word. His bonus is to tell you that this is coming from Hashem. Hu chayecha. Well, it doesn't say here right now, hu chayecha. Yeah, that God is a sustenance through the neshama of the person, and that awakens that natural love. This hasoga is not this is not a great, comprehensive and great and higher level comprehension. Because it's not that he's contemplating on some divine concept, like let's say the Shtalshos, Atzilus, or Tzimtzum, or Erein Sof Lifnei Tzimtzum. Or that he feels in his spirit the tave, the beauty, the goodness, and the ilui, and the quality, the higher quality of godliness on its own. This is all about how it's giving him life. This is not that level. We're not talking about someone contemplating on God himself, on the artist himself, not as he relates to us, on the artist as he is on his own, God on his own. And because of that, once you appreciate God on his own and his quality, to do that, that would be nimshach ha'ava, a love to that God. But here, rak, however, in this case, what we're talking about, Murgash, is rak mashem is beinin. The only thing is that it's qualifying. His contemplation is shalakusu achayis shalai. That godliness is his life source. It's his life, chayecha, va'yekir be'inyan achayis, and the preciousness and the value in this life that God gives him. That is called katnus hasaga, because you're not talking about God in his full glory, God on his own terms. You're talking about how God is giving you life. You're talking about your neshama, or God is giving life to the world. That's katnus hasaga, and that's only to awaken and stimulate and arouse the natural love that the person has to life, to the source of life. So it's, on one hand, it's not mutveh anymore, which is concealed and just a natural wiring, reflexive, behavioral and natural wiring of the person. Here we're talking already, there is a sapling, something has developed into an emotion. That emotion is requires some contemplation, ktsas, like he said, in order to be able to be aware of this divine energy, so that will essentially awaken the natural midas that he has in that va. That's how he explains Murgash. So there's a seichel involved. Now we discussed this at length back on page 1223, 1224, but now he's discussing it even more in Aveda, especially in context of the divine soul right now. Okay. So we finish this paragraph. It's your turn now. Any questions, any comments, anything? And just for the record, it's not over yet. Next paragraph, he begins. He's going to talk more details about it. So it's not like we haven't ended the subject at all, but we've moved forward in the growth, starting this growth process. Anyone? Go ahead. It's your turn. The floor is yours. Nothing? Okay.
I have a small question. It's probably premature. I'm pretty sure it's premature, but it seems like worth asking because it's a fairly simple concept we're at right now. And as we get to Muskal, it's probably going to get more complicated. So my question is, you have the midos coming into Murgash and it's coming into Giluim, but at the same time, it seems like it's really a mental contemplative state. There's no real action per se. There's no even manifestation of this mindset, this appreciation of life, if you will, that he's talking about here. It's sort of just, you're aware of it. Now you could say that's a form of Giluim, but it's really all happening inside of you. It's not really manifesting itself in any outward way. I mean, you could say to someone next to you, boy, I really like being alive. I mean, that's a revelation. But if you take, that's a call, if you will. If you take the Chomer, you take it more complicated into development of the midos, nefesh eloki, it suggests that a contemplative state, an awareness of, okay, I have chesed, I have gvura, I have tiferes, and I can understand what these things are. They're beautiful things, and I should be these ways, and I should balance these things, et cetera, et cetera. But it suggests that the contemplative mind, that somehow that's a revelation itself. Although we know, obviously, that the ultimate expression of godliness is the Pol Mamish in action and the Torah mitzvahs, the Masim Tovim. So I guess my question comes to ask about how can it really be Gilui, it's revelation if it's sort of just happening inside your brain. In other words, I can say I want to be a good Jew.
With all respect, you missed the main point here.
Okay.
This all is about Gilui Hamidus, not Moichin. The Moichin here is only a adjunct, basically a facilitator. If you look in the words that he said, Hatvah, he said, is concealed, like the seed in the ground. We're talking now of an actual feeling of love. So he says these words, that there's his galus ha'ava v'yira tivis. That's the key thing you have to remember. What's the Torah, Nihi, or the level of Ibur or Mutveh, he said clearly is action-based. So we have the Sur Maran Asay Tev. Action has been covered, even if you have no Giluyim at all. Even if there's no revealed love, this level of Aveda is you're completely committed to what God wants you to do. So the action is in place. But that's not what God wants. Also, you should feel it. It should be something that impermeates your emotions. So he's now talking about the next level is where your emotions are beginning to be stimulated. There's actually a feeling. It's still a natural feeling, but it's now revealed. He says clearly to himself, he says his bonus ketuv and kain, his galus amidus, because Murgash his galus aviyira tivis. And he goes even further and he says, just one word I was looking for. Ba'atzme. Oh, right here. Spilus ba'atzme sheyesh kan gili ava ayira belev. So there's an actual feeling of being attracted to God, to that source of life. So it's not a philosophical, the mind, he just added at the end, he said, we learned earlier that for a person to have that emotion to come stimulated, you need some form of being awareness. So I would call it an awareness more than anything that allows you to appreciate it. So that feeds the emotion. That would be like a child is ready. A child, we're not talking about a newborn, a child that loves his father, but he's not aware. Whatever, he's distracted. So he's focusing, oh, that's my father. That's the father that gave birth to me. That's the father that takes care of me. In this case, this is the father that gives me life. So there's an emotional attraction. And Av is a mitzvah.
I see.
He actually said even more than that. He actually brought the mitzvah, lahava es Hashem alekecha, ki hu chayecha. So that's the key thing to remember here.
Got it. It's sort of like if you have a child and you tell the child even before they, give daddy a kiss or give daddy a hug. The child's going to do it because they follow instructions, but they don't know what's going on there. That's supposed to be a feeling of love. Then as they get a little older, and they contemplate, this is my father, this is whatever, feel a connection and etc. Then you start to feel the love. But initially there's no feeling, it's just an action. Is that a fair analogy?
Yeah.
Okay, I got it. Thank you for the clarification.
Well, an analogy, the first part of the analogy, I probably would say if a child just follows orders of their parents, not even a kiss, just orders. And the next level is they start feeling a connection and therefore an attraction, but it's basically a similar idea. Yeah.
So action here is assumed. The issue is, what are you feeling about the action? Are you doing it rotely, or do you feel some connection to the Eibishter, some love, and that's sort of starting to stir up the
in other words, action is the minimum. Action is the minimum.
Got it.
You're committed, and that's it. Like we spoke about, you hire someone, they may do the job, but they don't feel for it. They don't have any passion. They have no excitement.
Okay. Thank you for the clarification.
Sure. Anybody else want to ask or say anything? If not, okay, we'll stop at the end of the first paragraph on page 12.